Dean, back down to your performance. So the last video we got Jeff's truck running and started playing with like the IAC settings to get it to idle good and stuff. And we got most of that pretty much squared away. So the truck starts, it runs pretty good. Needs a little bit of adjustments here and there, not a big deal. But what we're doing with it is being that we found that this header is leaking in the back. I got, well, I had, oh, it's on the back of the truck, but I got the copper RTV to seal up the header. That's the way I do all of our exhaust manifolds, or headers, I should say, whether they be for a turbo manifold or just a stock build, type deal. We use the copper RTV, this stuff here. It says it's good to like 700 degrees, but I have it on, which is twin turbo LS, and knock on wood, I don't have any issues. We have it on the airboat. Knock on wood, he doesn't have any issues, and he's been through every brand style gasket you could possibly imagine. Even like those like multi-layer, like aluminum crush style. I don't remember the brand of them, but they're real thick and they got these gnarly sharp edges on them. And then when you put it on and you tighten it, it crushes together. And I know on the airboat, he had the issue with, like, they lasted all of like 5 minutes. So that wasn't really good. But this is kind of, an example. I know this is out of the car now, but you can see there on all the exhaust ports, we just put the RTV around it, the headers. And you can see they didn't have a leak. This one leaked prior, and this is mostly oil stain, but you can see the flanges are all clean on them. Same with that side. Not clean, but you can see there's no black soot from the exhaust leaks. And those were on the car for a couple weeks, had a few hundred miles put on them. A brand new motor, big block. He drives it pretty hard, so yep, that's what we're doing. So I'm gonna start and get after it, and then come back and go through some other things we got. Also, and he doesn't know, and this won't be posted up for a little bit, but we also got the MSD trans controller. It actually came in early, thank God. I got some AC stuff for him, try and work out the AC, but we got the atomic controller and the 4L60 harness. You have to buy the harness separate from the controller, because you could buy like Ford, I think Dodge, it might just be Ford. But yeah, it's a plug and play unit with like 4L60s, 4L80s, 4L70s, and then whatever Ford transmissions they go for. So this is just the trans harness. I already kind of opened everything up, so it plugs into the transmission, and then this plugs into the MSD box, and then you got this is your VSS sensor, your speed sensor is right here. And what's cool about this one is I've had them before where, like the Terminator X does it, they give you this style plug. It's terminated into the harness, and like on the Caprice, it was actually this style plug. Well, you can see it's already in this harness, the older style. I think it's 93 and down, something like that, or 94, I can't remember exactly, but it's already there. So you have the old style and the new style, which is pretty cool. And I believe this plug right here, so you'll have an extra harness. Yeah, this is the old one, you can see it kind of loops right there and goes to that plug. So I just got to unplug this right here, take that little guy out, and then plug it into this one, and it'll plug right into his transmission. He also has an older 4L60 style. And then this is the actual controller, this box over here. And then throw this down here. So yeah, it comes packaged good, blah, 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 yay. Right down there. Spin it around. So this is the module, and this is your little handheld screen that you use to like do all your settings and stuff, and then it'll also act as your display. And then on the back you got some wires, super gnarly stiff cable there, and then in the bottom is your main harness, and they give you a bag of goodies with the SD card, which all that stuff will have to be updated. Then they give you all the little mounting grommets, so the SD card, we'll have to update the firmware and stuff on this box. And then this is the main harness, and it's got a bunch of, oh yeah, there it goes. Got a bunch of wires you got to hook up for different things, and there's different options with it as well. Like this brown wire, I pulled it out last night because we won't use the brown wire. This is a Ford only wire. But then on the other end, you've got the pink is like your 12-volt ignition, your battery, and then you got your TPS, which I believe is the orange, black, and yellow. And then on this one, you have different settings. You have mode select, so you can set up 2 different mode selects. Well, I'll go through all that stuff. I'm gonna get all this stuff installed, wired in, get his exhaust fixed, and then we're gonna go from there with the video. So for now, stay tuned, and when I come back, I'll have everything done. The exhaust will be fixed. Whether it's today or tomorrow that I finish everything up, that'll be. So I'll be right back. Okay, so I got the heads are all cleaned, all the where the flanges, pretty clean. There's a couple little spots there, but that's pretty good. And then the header flange is all clean. And what I did notice is you see all these tiny pits in the weld. So the way they do headers, some companies anyways, is they shove the tube through and they weld it on this side. They'll put a big pile of weld on this side all the way across it, and then they run it across like they have like a grinding wheel. It's like a stone wheel that runs across them, and that kind of cuts them flat. But I mean, you can see there's just a ton of pinholes, and that usually happens with like MIG weld, and kind of like you get like contamination in the weld. But there's just a ton of them everywhere. There's a ton of pinholes everywhere in every single port. So it really doesn't help when you're trying to seal up a header, that there's a bunch of pinholes, because like a cylinder head is machined, it's off of like a CNC, so it's like a perfectly flat surface. So you want your manifold or header to be kind of, perfectly flat surface to be able to mate up to it. You almost want it to not even need a gasket or any kind of sealer that, it would be that tight, but obviously there's no way to bolt enough stuff. But so I'm going to put the RTV on this side, get everything back in, snugged up, and then jump on the other side. And then kind of when I get the other side apart, I'll be able to come over here and kind of give everything once over final tightening and get that gasket sealer to kind of squish tight and make a good seal in there. And then I'll let it sit. Most likely I'll let it sit overnight, at least overnight. That way there, it'll give the RTV a chance to cure real good. I mean, we've done them to where you start it and run it like an hour later, 2 hours later, whatever. But on this, I want it to sit because they're a pain in the butt to get to. So I want it to sit and cure, and I want it to come out real good and him not to have to worry about exhaust leaks. So yeah, I'm going to do that now, and I'll come right back. Alright, so we're back at it. It's the next day, actually. Yesterday, I got stuff done. Yeah. I got the steering wheel in. Didn't have any bolts to mount it, but I got the adapter on. Put the clip back in it like, they have from the factory, the little clip to hold the nut if it ever loosens. So I got the steering wheel in, I got the buttons in. I also ran all the wiring. All the wiring out in the engine bay is probably 99% done. I just have the AC stuff. And there's this plug here that was for the ABS that I'm not sure if I'm just going to kind of leave the plug and kind of tuck it down in there and hide it. Because to trace those wires through and into that big harness, you'd have to pull the dash and cut all the tape and do all that fancy fun stuff. So I think I'm just going to leave that one. And it's a plug. It's not open wires or nothing. So the MSD box, I ended up mounting, I kind of looked out here on the fender well, and in my head, like the RFI stuff, all the radio frequency stuff messes with the fuel injection pretty good. So I'd imagine, that box will get messed up, could experience issues with RFI. So I didn't want to put it near the coil, near the CDI box. So I kind of opted to keep it away from everything, and I actually I had to fix a little bit of this panel that sits under the dashboard anyways. So I mounted the box here, and I put the rubber grommets in. You can kind of see it right there. I put the rubber grommets in. I didn't use the little metal sleeves that come with this box because they're for self-tapping screws, and I don't really use self-tapping screws. So I took the main harness and I ran it out that hole where the factory wires come out up into the engine bay, and that has like the TPS signal, TPS ground. It also has a 5-volt out for the TPS, this orange one right here. That's actually a 5-volt reference, that if you have a standalone TPS, you would use this wire. But being that the Holley Sniper has its own 5-volt signal for the TPS, I ran those wires all the way up and over, and they come through here and then up, and I tied them into the Holley TPS, which was a pain in the butt. In reality, what I should have done would have made it easier, not that better or anything like that, but it just would have made it easier. I have a bunch of these pigtails from 5-volt like transducers. I could have used the longer wires on the pigtail and just made this a little bit easier, but I got it all in there. Everything's heat shrunk, crimped good, tucked up in there. I plan on probably kind of just zip tying the Holley wires together here and keep them neat there. I'll leave it at that. They're all zip tied right under there from Holley anyways, so if I run this one over like that and kind of put a zip tie on it, you know, that'll keep it in line with the Holley wiring. So I got all those wires done. I got the transmission harness plugged in and routed pretty good, and then I came up the inner fender down in there, and under the AC box there's like a groove where the firewall takes a dip in, but the inner fender doesn't touch it. So that's the harness right there. Right now it's a little bit close to the header, but it's not right there. So I need to take the harness and just kind of pull it off to the side here like this, and then put a P-clamp with a screw going kind of through the pinch weld, and I could do a self-tapper for that, and then that'll hold the harness, you know, far enough away from the exhaust. And then I routed it, you can kind of see it goes up and over the transmission, so it stays a good distance away from the exhaust and all the heat from the exhaust. So that's all done. I actually pulled the battery feed, is this wire here, which came out of the factory harness and was the ECU battery for the factory original ECM. So I fed the battery signal off of here, ran the pink over, not this one, ran the 12-volt ignition, sorry, it's pink, 12-volt ignition through the harness, through, under, and tied it into the relay box that I made, the fuse and relay box, which one-handed sucks. There it goes. And it's that 10 amp fuse right there. So again, I took another one of the pins I had left over in that box and crimped it onto the wire, stuck it up in this side of the terminal, pushed the fuse in that came with it, because they give you like that inline fuse holder right there. They give you that, so instead of using that, it's on the factory box, or not the factory box, the little relay box that I made, and that has the CDI, the Holley Sniper, and the MSD. So all his standalone, if that's what you want to call it, are all on their own fuses out here. Could have ran them inside to the factory box, there's plenty of room, but there's no need to do that. Then I strung the Holley output, oh wait, the 5-volt. So what I did, I get carried away here, this orange wire right here is that 5-volt reference from the MSD box. So being that his oil pressure sensor had the pigtail plugged in at one point, but just was hooked up wrong, and I had found in the wiring, this wire right here is the one they had running down to the knock sensor, but that's actually his oil pressure gauge. So I fed the 5-volt to the pigtail from the MSD, and then the signal to the dash, and ran a ground to over here onto the ground terminal, which is supposed to be like an ECU ground or sensor ground in the ECU, but I don't feel like having to cut apart another sensor wire on the Holly. I'd rather not do that. So I ran it over to ground and it seems to be working. It has a lot of oil pressure. It's like 65 pounds at idle, and then once it starts to warm up, it comes down to about 60. I didn't get it fully up to temp to see if it's down, but you know, you throttle into it and it goes up a little bit and comes back down. So that's all good. The coolant sensor for the dash is actually working now. There was a ground in the harness, which, you know, this is the type of sensor that normally comes on these trucks. So one side will be ground and one side will be signal. It works off of ohms. So with this wire just hooked up, maybe there's not a good enough ground through the sensor and into the intake, so it would pin the coolant gauge all the way over. So now that I got it, I found the ground and hooked the ground up, because I was going to go to this sensor, and I found a pigtail and I wired this wire in and then wired a ground just to this stud just to see the gauge worked. But being on top of the thermostat, it's not going to show you, it shows you a different reading. So now with the Holly sensor over there on that side of the intake, and the factory sense gauge is hooked to over here, they should read pretty close to similar on that. So that's what I use that 5 volt for, because there'd be nowhere else in the truck that you would get a 5 volt from. So I figured I might as well use it and hook up his oil pressure. Now he has an oil pressure gauge, whereas the Sniper, you know, they don't have oil pressure like a Terminator X or Dominator or HP or any of those. So the other thing I did was this throttle bracket. So this edge over here used to be all the way in here, and the cable kind of came on an angle. And then this, the jam nut for it, it would catch on here. You can see where it's like got like galled up a little bit. It would catch on there and it wouldn't let them go full throttle. So I just took like a piece of square tube and I cut it down kind of in half to give it like a C-channel look, and I extended the bracket out basically from here where you see that weld there out to here is what I extended, and then I attached this at the very back of the square tube, which, you know, was strong but wasn't like super duper strong. So you can kind of see right inside of there. See, there it is. You can see that little piece right there is like a gusset. It's another little piece of metal that like I triangulated from this bracket to this bracket, and then I just kind of cut the front off to give it a clean look. But now the cable, you know, it sits out and it's more in line, you know, where the cable mounts to the bracket to the throttle lever is more in line. They had this stud flipped and it was on this side, so that made it even worse that the cable slid on from this side. So now it's all good. It gets full throttle. The way the S10s are, the firewall is so close, you know, it does put a bind in the throttle cables. So I tried to route it the best I could. It would open it and close it most of the way. The throttle return springs are okay on these. Typically you don't need to put another return spring, but this one was just barely sticking open. Like it would just hang a hair open at, like, I think on the handheld it showed like 4%. So I went ahead and threw another spring on the bottom, this little hole down here, and I went to that hole down there and hooked the spring on it, so that now it's guaranteed it comes back to zero all the time. Getting back to over here, this is going to be a forever video. I got the MSD box, it's all wired in, and I just got done. I pulled the TAC output off the Sniper. It's also wired into the MSD box out there, and then I just continued the Holley wire because it says tack output into the loom for the MSD that has all the optional triggers. All these ones here, the light blue, green, dark blue, red, and gray. These are like your mode selects, your torque converter lockup, your torque converter unlock. One of these has to go to the brake switch. So, and then I got the yellow and a brown. I had to extend the brown for the tack output, and the yellow is the input number 2 for the Holley Sniper, which should be his two-step. So I got those. I P-clamped it up here. You know, it's loose, and there's this cable here. I mean, I'm assuming that's a antenna or something. I don't know, but I just put that in there just to put it in there. And then this is that MSD, the little handheld. So I also removed the speed buffer box that hung down here, that white box that was here, that changes that speed signal for the factory dash and the older ECUs, puts out X amount of pulses or whatever it is. So I pulled the speedometer wire. It's a light blue with a black stripe. I pulled that out, wired it in to the MSD. So everything's working now. So the MSD comes up. So that comes up. Transmission fluid temp, TPS, you got RPM along the top, mile per hour, gear, shift, but this won't stay plugged in. That's what he's got the Sniper dash for. And yeah, I know that the battery voltage is getting low. I haven't quite got the alternator sorted out yet, but it does start right up. I got all that sorted. Right now it's showing the speed, you know, on here. Tires are going, so it shows the speed about 8 miles an hour on here. It shows the RPM is right, 700-ish. So on there, 700-ish. But then on there, we're cruising along at a cool 40 mile an hour. And it's not in gear, but if you put it into gear, you see it's first gear, drops all the way down, roughly kind of flickering around 10 mile an hour. This is only showing 2 mile an hour. So I think what I have to do so it's set to 40. I'm gonna set it to 20 because I believe that's what the factory is. So it didn't change on the dashboard yet. Showing 2 mile an hour there and like 12 mile an hour there. So I'll have to play with it. But it does show first gear, second gear, back to first gear. Park neutral. So everything's working. I just got to finish wiring up for the shift light and the two-step and the line lock. I just got to finish wiring that up and then add in the button for the mode select. Thinking here, let me see. I'm not gonna do the manual bump up, bump down, or bump down. I'm not gonna do that. I'm just gonna do the gray for the calibration select. And I might do the green, the torque converter lock, to where he can click it in and it'll lock in second. It'll lock in whatever gear he wants other than first. So I'm gonna get back on it, but for now, that one here, whoops, that's my hand. So what I'll do is I'll get everything. I gotta bleed the brakes out too. That's the other thing I gotta do. Kind of an important thing. But I'm gonna finish everything up, get all the brakes bled, get those wires done, get the dashboard back together, get the grill on it, and in the next video, I'll just kind of run through. Jeez Louise, I'll kind of run through that real quick. I mean, bleeding brakes is bleeding brakes. You can watch a million people do it, and it's the same thing over and over. But I'll just kind of with the switches and stuff, and then we should, in the next video, should be taking this for a ride, and exactly what the customer wants. He wants me to melt the tires off. He doesn't want the truck back unless it's able to do all the burnouts it can do. So thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, hit the bell to be notified of new videos. Do me a big favor, leave a comment. I appreciate comments, and I always like to interact with them. So thanks for watching. Have a good day.